Good afternoon and welcome to the Chicken Box, the show where we say, don't be a chicken, get on the box. So, your box is a platform to share your opinions and your fact based research on topics important to Black people right here at the Afro American Newspapers Facebook page. We're so glad that you're here. It's 12 noon on the East Coast, and so in many cases, it's time for lunch, hence the name the chicken box. But you may be in another part of the world and just having breakfast, or maybe you just finished your dinner. But regardless of that, grab your favorite beverage. I've got a cup of water here, and weigh in on the comments. Those of you who are regular watchers of the viewers of the chicken box know that we have a free flowing discussion. And so I'm Frances Tony Draper. I am the publisher of the 129-year-old Afro-American newspaper. And this is a multi-generational co-hosted show usually, but our millennial co-host Misha is not with us today. And our Gen X co-host Kevin Peck is not with us today, but we have a special co-host with us today, and she is Dana Peck. So Dana, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Mrs. Draper. Hello, everyone. Dana Peck. I'm Director of Digital Solutions for the Afro, and I am representing Gen X today in this discussion.
Yes. Any Gen Xers in the house, or millennials, or Gen Zs? I think there's an Alpha Gen now. Just put it in the chat. Welcome to everybody. We ask that you would share this broadcast right now with your Facebook friends and Instagram friends and say, hey, come on, don't be a chicken, get on the box. And so we're excited about today's topic. All month long, the entire month of August, we've been talking about topics of importance around the subject of education. And today's topic is Black people versus integration. Y'all know we have a versus format, right? Not that we're fighting, but some things like this we might be. So we have a versus format. And so we're talking about education as a part of the Afro's We're Still Here edition. It is hot off the press. Dana, I don't think you've seen it. It is beautiful.
Oh, I can't wait to see
It highlights our HBCUs and gives a little bit about them. And so we're, as well as so many other things, as we talk about equity in education. And a little bit later, we will make a distinction between equality in education and equity in education. And so we're going to talk about that today, but we have a special guest. We have a special guest. Oh, by the way, if you have a message you want to let Impeccable know that he's missed, put it in the chat. We'll pass it along. Or Misha, we'll pass that along to them as well. Oh, and before I forget, Dana, and before our guest comes and you introduce him, we are also participating this week, next week rather, on Thursday, the 26th at the 10 o'clock hour, in a special equity and education forum co-sponsored by the Afro and the Baltimore Business Journal. Go to afro.com and you can get that information. All right, Dana, I am so excited about our guest for this afternoon. Would you please introduce him, bring him on screen? We want to hear from him this afternoon. We want to celebrate him as well.
Yes, I am happy to introduce everyone to a friend of mine. I've met Sam Oni about, I guess, 10 years ago, and he's a very interesting young man. He just celebrated a big birthday. I'll let him share what that birthday was. But we have Sam on today because he was the first student to integrate Mercer University, and Mercer University is located in Macon, Georgia. And Sam is, I guess he said he claims 3 nationalities. Is that right, Sam? Nigerian, Ghanaian, and American. And he has just a great story of integrating Mercer in 1963. So Sam, welcome to the Afro-American family. He is a subscriber. And welcome to the Chicken Box.
Well, thank you, Dana. And thank you, Dr. Draper. It is a thing of genuine pleasure for me to be able to join this fellowship. I'm mindful of an observation made by someone to the effect that after all is said and done, there is always so much more said than done.
Ah, I like it.
We ought to be mindful of that, uh, not just on this program, but also as a people, that we need to try to find a way to combine action with words. So, I don't know where you want me to begin,
Well,
Dana,
what, what,
Dr.
what,
Herbert.
why don't we do this? Why don't we do this? Why don't we start this way? I don't want to assume that everybody knows your story, right?
Okay.
I know it's well publicized. You know, certainly we could Google you, and other people have written things about you. You've written things about your own experience. But can you give us just a quick overview? Can you peel it back to 1963 and when you were a young college age, or even before that in Ghana, and can you bring us up to date? Let us know what happened then.
Fair enough. It all began in the mid, well, early 50s, actually, when, under the leadership of Kwame Nkrumah, the people of the Gold Coast began to agitate for their liberty, for their freedom, for their independence from Great Britain, so-called Great Britain, which had ruled that colony for so many years. And I, as a youngster, I was in my teens, about the same age as Dana, actually, in those days. But I was very, very a curious young man, and uh, the agitation for independence really fired my imagination, and I was caught up in it in the way that a young person can be caught up. And then finally, in 1957, Ghana, under the leadership of Kwame Nkrumah, did achieve its independence. And that is an experience that is permanently stamped on my consciousness. And I remember Kwame Nkrumah standing up on the podium that memorable night saying, Ghana, our beloved motherland, is free forever. And with the and then another significant statement that Nkrumah made was that Ghana's independence was meaningless unless it was tied up with the liberation of the entire African continent. And that was when my own incipient awareness of other Black countries that also have been under the control of foreigners from not only Britain but France, Germany for a short time, and practically all the European countries, lording it over us and stealing us blind natural resources. Uh, I know this for a fact, although as a child I didn't quite connect the dots, as it were. I lived in a mining town, Nsuta. I was growing up in that town, and I used to be fascinated by these little mini trains that will be running up in the hills. And what the mini train was doing was carrying resources, namely bauxite, to be then transported to Takoradi, the only port city in the Gold Coast in those days. And the bauxite will be shipped to Great Britain. Bauxite, as many of you know, was the raw material from which aluminum is made. And so that was my first encounter with the exploitation of our resources to enrich uh, white people to whom we're not related, who had nothing to do with us other than to come to us and steal us blind. The other resources, of course, were equally stolen in a similar fashion. It was around this time that I came, the word bump is actually appropriate, bumped into Southern Baptist missionaries. And again, it didn't mean anything to me that they were Southern Baptists, but they were Baptists, and I gathered there must be at least 2 dozen brands of the Baptist denomination. But these happen to be Southern Baptists, meaning that they came from the southern part of the United States to uh, preach the gospel of Jesus to my people. When I met them in the 50s, it was almost 100 years after the first Southern Baptist missionary arrived. And by coincidence, the Reverend Thomas Bowen was a Georgian from Jackson County, Georgia. And he and his wife arrived in Nigeria. And of all the places they could have settled in Nigeria, among the different ethnic groups they, among whom they could have settled, they chose the Yoruba and settled in a place called Obomosho. And they had come, of course, to 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 civilize and Christianize and and educate these backward people, savages, pagans. Um, my people, hospitable Yoruba people, received Reverend and Mrs. Bowen, provided accommodation were limited as it was, fed them and all that. The reception was so uh, overwhelming to the Bowen couple that when Mrs. Bowen delivered their first child, a girl, they named that child Yoruba. Fast forward, 1963, I've come to meet, so other missionaries then followed the Bowens until I met the ones that I met in the 50s. And we began getting to know one another because the missionary that lived in my hometown needed an interpreter. As he didn't speak the Fanti language, and I came in handy, and we will go to church with them on Sundays. Serve. Well, it was actually a beginning Sunday school, more where mostly children that will respond to the call for people to. But I became an interpreter, and in the course of my getting to know them, they began preaching to me. Uh, uh, and I will tell them that I've always been a Christian. I was born into an Anglican, which is, I think we refer to them as Episcopalian in the United States. But I was born into that family and been going to church all my life. But the Southern Reverend McGinnis made it clear to me that the brand of the Christian faith that I got from the Anglican, was not quite good enough. That I had to be born again. Didn't quite understand what that meant. But more important than that, they said I also needed to be baptized the proper way. And the proper way, as far as the Southern Baptists were concerned, was to be baptized by immersion. And so gullible, naive, innocent youngster that I was, I bought what I consider propaganda line, hook, and sinker, and thereby became a Southern Baptist Christian. One thing led to another. They it got to a point a few months after I met them, they began telling me that, well, now that you've been born again, you need to devote yourself to a service of the Lord. And I said, how do I do that? So by becoming a preacher. Cut the long story short, I found myself at a pastor's school, it was called. It was a kind of a mini theological school, theological seminary. Uh, but it was where the aspect of the Christian faith and the Bible were taught. And I became a pastoral student, which led to my being appointed a pastor of a village church at the ripe old age of 15, 16. And that was the beginning. And it's a long story, but I'll cut it short. As time went on, I began reading, and now we're an independent nation. We have our own television program as opposed to the BBC. We could cover whatever story we found relevant. And so the windows were sort of thrown open to the rest of the world, especially the African world. And I began seeing images of racial demonstration in the United States, Montgomery, Alabama, the bus boycott, the Bull Connor, Governor Orville Forbes of Arkansas, trying to prevent black students from attending I think it was Little Rock, Arkansas high school. So that was the beginning of my consciousness raising, as it were, becoming familiar with the fact that there are people who look like me in a place called America. Because prior to that, the British made sure that we learn everything there was to know about the British and their culture and their history and their heroes. And come Empire Day, we school children will march on Empire Day, and then when we get to the stadium, we will all sing "God Save the Queen." It was Queen Elizabeth then, and but this is a queen of white people on the other side of the ocean that had nothing, no historical, yes, but we were singing the praise of a white queen, and whose people were busy exploiting us, ruling over us. So that was the beginning of my consciousness raising experience.
But
And I began chatting, asking questions about what was going on in America.
Wait, Miss Sam, give me 1 minute, right before you finish, because I want to hear the rest. We want to hear that. But there's some people that are just joining us.
Yes.
They may have missed the intro. So if you're just joining us, this is the Chicken Box. You're at the right place at the right time. It's the noon hour, and somebody's called you Mr. Sam. Marion's sister Effie, I don't know if I've said her name correctly. Effie was with us, and Bonnie Deans and Byron Deese and Chippy Bass and Jewel and so many other people are just saying thank you for teaching us. So I don't want to interrupt you, but just want to. There's some people who are just joining, and so here we are with the great Sam. How do I pronounce your last name? Is it Oni or Oni?
Okay, it's Oni.
Oni. All right. So Sam started, guys. Yeah. So Mr. Oni started back in the 50s, all right? Because he has to do that to tell us how he got to Mercer. And so First Black to Integrate, which was then Mercer College. All right, so go on. So he's a pastor. If you all missed the beginning, you missed a fascinating story. So Southern Baptist missionaries came, right?
Yes.
And you had baptism by both fire and immersion, right? And you're a pastor at 15 or 16. And so here we are. Okay, go on. We are your captive audience here.
Yeah, so then I was in the pastor school, and they had an I knew they had an eye on me. They wanted to recruit as many indigenous people. The common term used here is native people. Of course, everybody's native. Maybe that may be having to do with your place of birth. But indigenous people, the Fanti, the Ga, the Yoruba, the Igbo, and so they sort of saw in me, and if I may say so myself, I was a young person of very strong Christian conviction. So I began asking them, these Southern Baptist missionaries, what the churches that had sent them to us to preach to us about the Christian gospel, what was, and you know, Christian brotherhood and Christian sisterhood, what were the churches doing to bring about racial reconciliation between the races in America? And quite honestly, most of the missionaries among whom I found myself, were embarrassed and very defensive, because they knew their background. They had come from Macon, Georgia, or Waycross, Georgia, or Savannah, Georgia, or Memphis, Tennessee, or Birmingham, Alabama. They had attended. I didn't know all of this then, but I soon found out. They had grown up in segregated cities and towns all across the South, and they had attended segregated schools. They had lived in cities where there were, water fountains for Black people and white people, and then gone on to segregated colleges, Southern Baptist colleges such as Mercer University. But the most telling part of their experience prior to them coming to us to preach about the Christian faith was the fact that every Sunday they had attended segregated church services. And somehow, in spite of this background, they found themselves called to the mission field to come to us in Africa and preach about Christian brotherhood, Christian sisterhood, and Christian love. So I was having conflict with that. And so I kept asking them, not to challenge them, but just curiosity. I wanted to know. And as I said, most of them were very, very defensive and evasive, except for one missionary by the name of Harris Mobley. Harris Mobley happened to have come from Georgia, his hometown, Savannah, and it turned out that he had graduated from Mercer University. So the more I discussed this, he was the only one open to engage me in discussing the racial division in America. The more I discussed it with him, and then so one day he called me and said, "Sam, are you ready to be shocked?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, you've been you've been pestering me about race relations in America and what the role of the church was in trying to bring about racial reconciliation." He said, "Well, let me tell you a story. If Vivian, his wife, if Vivian and I were to return home on leave and return to our hometown of Savannah, and upon getting back to Savannah, we invite you to come and visit us. And you came, you accepted our invitation and you came. And come Sunday, we ask you to come worship with us at our home church in Savannah. Guess what would happen?" And I said, "What?" "You would be turned away from our home church in Savannah." It was like a thunderbolt. I mean, I just could not bring myself to. I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that someone who had come to preach about Christian love to me and my people in Africa will then be turned away from one of the churches that had been contributing since 1853. That was the year the first Southern Baptist missionary arrived among my people in Nigeria. So to say that I was dumbfounded is to say that for lack of a better way or a worse way to describe it. Anyway, the conversation continued. I remained a student at the school, at the Bible school. Um, After a year in the Bible school, the missionaries again they were looking for prospects, young men and young women that might be able to help them to propagate, proselytize. So they gave me a scholarship to go transfer to the secondary school, the equivalent of high school. And I was beginning to see the sign, the trajectory that these guys have some plans for me, something in mind. They have found somebody that may become uh, be to lead an indigenous person that may help them spread the word. So I was in there, and then after my second year in that secondary school, the school went on strike, and I happened to have been one of the leaders of the strike. We went on strike because the the American missionaries did not understand the British education system, on which we were in those days. You did not graduate from secondary school by just having attended school for 12 years. Um, and that's true in America too. If you've attended the school for 12 years, you graduated. There was always an exam. It was called the West African School Certificate Exam. Very rigorous, and you have to prepare for it in a very rigorous manner. But the Southern Baptists have no clue. When we appeal to them to employ some Ghanaian teachers who have been through the system, who could have better prepared us, they insisted that those Ghanaian teachers, they couldn't, because those Ghanaian teachers would not be Southern Baptists. And we tried to reason with them. How could they be Southern? You just got here a few years ago, 2, 3 years. Uh, how could they be? They were impervious to reason. And so we thought the only way we can press upon these missionaries how serious the situation was for us was to go on strike. So the student leaders came to me and said, Sam, this is what's going on, and we'll want your support. We know you're the darling of the missionaries. Will you join? And I said, how can I not join you? Because I'm not going to sit by what you fight for this change and then me benefiting from it. So I joined the strike, and the missionaries panicked, and they shut down the school and sent everybody home. And about a week later, they wrote to everybody inviting them back, except for 7 of us, whom they had identified as the ringleaders of the strike. And so that was how my opportunity to get a secondary education, or maybe beyond that, was.
So you got in some good trouble. It sounds like.
Yeah, indeed. As a matter of fact, Dr. Draper, as a matter of fact, as we rounded the campus, in the protesting, one missionary wife, tears streaming down her face, looked at me and said, and pointed a finger and said, Sam Oni, you have bitten the fingers that fed you.
Ah.
And so I wasn't surprised when I was counted among the 7 ringleaders that were kicked out. So that was the end. It was essentially to be the end of my opportunity to get educated. And But it turned out that one of the missionaries, well, Harris Mobley, who became my friend, was the one that offered me a chance. He said, look, if you can get yourself admitted into another secondary school, I'll be willing to pay your fees. And I got myself got admitted into a secondary school. And by the time I graduated, Harris Mobley had returned to America, not to return to Ghana, because he was truly disillusioned by the practices that he observed his fellow missionaries. They were essentially carrying to the mission field uh, the, the practices and lifestyle in America. They lived apart from us Africans, although they were on Sunday, they will attend the same service with us. So Harris Mobley was disillusioned and he wasn't going back. But let me again, I'm getting long-winded, but out of the blue, so we stayed in touch. And I think it was early in 1962, I got a letter from him indicating that Mercer was about to be, was interested in being integrated, and that he had submitted my name to Mercer University without even discussing it with me. So I ended up at Mercer, not ever applying. And he submitted my name because the president of Mercer University wanted to integrate the university, but he dared not admit a local Black student because of the opposition that will come from the Georgia Southern Baptist churches, from which in those days Mercer derived a great deal of financial support. So the president wasn't about to take the chance of getting on the wrong side of the Georgia Southern Baptists and thereby losing the financial support that came from that group. So um, Harris Mobley was now back home in Georgia. Mercer got wind of the fact that he had been to the mission field as a missionary. So they invited him to speak to the student body. He did, after which the president then invites him to his office. And in the course of their conversation, president made it known to the missionary, Harris Mobley, that he wanted to integrate, he's been wanting to integrate Mercer, but he was concerned about the not getting the support of the Georgia Southern Baptists. It was at that point that Harris Mobley said to the president, I think I have a solution to your dilemma. And when the president asked him, what do you have in mind? He said, well, look, we can be the Georgia Southern Baptists at their own game by bringing a Black student from Africa, from the mission field. So that was the strategy. And if we did that, the Georgia Southern Baptist would be hard pressed to reject him. Because, after all, they're the one that went send missionaries, and they've been doing it for over 100 years, sending missionaries to this young person that I have in mind. So they can very well deny him an opportunity to then come and study at one of their university. So I got the letter from Harris Mobley, and I thought about it, and I said, well, you asked for it because you're the one raising questions about race relations and all that. So an opportunity to go to the United States, then not so much to be the first Black student at Mercer, but also your presence, uh, reminding the Georgia Southern Baptists that if they could go to Africa and preach Christian love, brotherly love to the Africans, and with the result that one of those Africans is now a student at one of the formerly Lily White campus, then they will begin to see a need for them to begin to end discrimination, segregation in the churches. So I accepted
Sam,
the
can we
yes.
just pause for a second? Because I know, like everyone else, they're just riveted with your story. Like I mentioned, I've known you for 10 years and I love learning new things every time I hear you speak. I want to welcome everyone to the Chicken Box. Today, we are talking about Black people versus integration. And we have with us my friend, Sam Oni, who was a trailblazer and a first student at Mercer University in Macon, Georgia. He's worked as a college professor, journalist, consultant, and has always been an entrepreneur, a business owner. And I thought was interesting, one of the articles I saw is that you were, even though you have so much gratitude for those people that looked out for you on campus, you had to deal with a lot of forgiveness. So it's interesting, you'll hear later in his story what he had to deal with once he's on campus. But I want to give everyone an opportunity. If you do have questions for Mr. Oni, please put it in the chat. And if you know of anyone who would be interested in hearing this story, please share it. And if you missed the beginning, please check out the rebroadcast. We will have it on the Afro Facebook page as well as our Afro YouTube page. We want to welcome you again to the Chicken Box. Get on the box. We are hearing the story of Sam Oni. We have a couple of questions for you, Sam, too. We want you to reflect on as we continue on the story of you at Mercer University, and some questions for our listeners. Dr. Draper.
Well, you know what, Mr. O'Neill, before you finish, and I don't know if it's Dr. O'Neill, like I said, it sounds like you were pastor. I could put a lot of titles there, but you know what it feels like? And I want our viewers to weigh in, like we're sitting at the feet of the ancestors.
Yes.
And we're hearing the story unfold right here. And too often we don't do that.
Yeah.
We don't know where we came from, so we don't know where we're going, and we can't understand why we're where we are today because we don't know the history. So thank you. Continue on. We just do these commercial breaks in between because new people are joining and they need to maybe catch up with where we are. But this is the Chicken Box, sponsored by the Afro American newspapers, and we're glad you are here. All right. So listen, we were in Ghana. We're not in Ghana anymore. So now we're in Macon, Georgia, right? on the campus of Mercer University, who thought that if they brought a Ghanaian over, then it would not be as much resistance from the Southern Baptists. But to those who are watching, come on, weigh in even before he tells the story. Now, don't cheat and look it up. Do you think there was resistance? What do you think? Did they open up their arms wide and say, hey, we are so glad you're here? What happened? What do you think? All right, Mr. Sam, back to you.
Yes, it's really intriguing to no end. So the president and the missionary, well, the former missionary, were essentially congratulating one another. We found a way around, a way to be these Georgia Southern Baptists, you know, and bring a Black person and help us achieve our goal. So I was being used in quotation mark. But wouldn't you be glad to be used for the service of the Lord in this way? You know, so in other words, I was brought in as the first Black student because for Mercer to have picked a local Black student, and that I mean local, it could have been from Chicago, Boston, wherever, an American Black. They would have been, their position was clear. I mean, there was no ambiguity about that. So they thought if we were to bring an African Black, then we would have circumvented the opposition coming from the Southern Baptist. So got the letter. Yeah. So but they were wrong because I got the letter, and long story short, I arrived, and the opposition was still there, and it was quite strong. I arrived on campus on a Friday afternoon. In less than 24 hours, Saturday afternoon, there was a knock on my dormitory door. I opened the door. Standing there was this elderly white man who proceeded to introduce himself. Sam, and he knew of me because of the agitation, the debate ranging over the since 1962. So he knew when I was in the news, because it was also in the news, editorial in the New York Herald Tribune. It was in the days of the Cold War, so they were at each other's throat. The China's People's Daily did an editorial about why racism in America was so bad that it has to take an African from Ghana to come and integrate an all-white. And those were the days. Okay, so the yeah, I am Reverend Clifton Forrester, he said to me. I am the pastor of Tatnall Square Baptist Church. Tatnall Square Baptist Church happens to be located right on campus. It was an understanding between the church congregation and the university that it will be a win-win situation for them. The church will have constant inflow of young people from the campus attending service, and the university will not have to have this heavy burden on its conscience that students could not, churches were so far away that students could not attend to. But it was the Tatnall Square Baptist Church was on campus, and the Reverend Clifton Forrester, pastor of Tatnall Square Baptist Church, came to forestall my making the mistake of trying to worship at a Southern Baptist church. Now, Tatnall Square, need I remind you, happened to be among the consortium of Southern Baptist churches that funded and supported the Reverend Thomas Bowen in 1863, 1853. We're now talking about 110 years later, and other missionaries that had followed in his footsteps, some of whom I met, one of whom was Harris Mobley, who graduated from Mercer and who's now negotiating me coming to Mercer. So, Reverend Clifton Forrester made it clear to me that I won't be welcome. I received that news with a mixture of, call it righteous indignation, call it, but also a mixture of, righteous indignation and also pity. Because I said to myself, this is a man who represents Jesus and is teaching that we may all be one, just as he and the Father are one. But of course, so anger, shock, righteous indignation. I thanked him and I assured him that I won't be coming to his church. Thank you very much. What he didn't know was that Don Baxter, a young white man from Atlanta, had agreed to be my roommate. He was actually handpicked by the university. The university was concerned that coming from as far away as I was coming, it will be difficult for me to the loneliness will be much too much. So they found a student, handpicked student, who agreed to be my roommate. What Reverend Forrester didn't know was that Don Baxter, my roommate, and I had made up our minds that we were going to go to Tatnall Square, not because of what Reverend Forrester had told us, because we made the decision before he came to see me, that we will be going to Vineville Baptist Church instead. The reason being that when the commotion, the argument, the debate, and some of it acrimonious debate over integrating Mercer came about, the board of trustees of Mercer set up a committee, and one Reverend Walter Moore was the chairman of that committee, who was able to steer the committee to recommend to the board of trustees that indeed the time was opportune for Mercer to be integrated, and that Sam Oni should be the first student to integrate Mercer University. So we thought, Don Baxter and I assumed that this man of his state of consciousness would have led his congregation to similar way of, well, we would probably use the term progressive, but Jesus was neither progressive or conservative or evangelical. I digress a bit, but followers of Jesus. So we arrived at Vineville Baptist Church that Sunday morning, and we college students proceeded to Sunday school, and everything went smoothly without a hitch. At the end of which, we filed back into the sanctuary for the morning worship. And after the service was over, as is the common practice in most churches, you extend an invitation to guests or visitors or people who might be considering becoming members of your church. So about 20 of us, mostly students, lined up before the congregation to go through the mere formality of being welcome into the church. At which point, the pastor asked everybody to go back to their seats, except me. He then proceeded to introduce me. Friends were very honored today to have among us a young man who came to embrace the Christian faith as a result of our own missionary enterprise. His name is Sam Oni, at which point a man leapt to his feet. Reverend Moore, he said, "You're about to destroy this church by bringing niggers into the congregation, and I'm not going to stand for it." Now remember that the pastor and I are facing this congregation. I mean, I have a panoramic view of the entire congregation. When he was done, a woman, and that woman's image is one that is permanently stamped on my consciousness, because he was a petite woman, all red in the face. And she said, "Reverend Moore, my grandfather helped to found this church, and you're about to destroy it, and I am not going to put up with it." And another man got up and spoke in similar toxic vein. At which point, the Southern Baptists pride themselves on being very democratic. And Dr. Draper, I'm sure you remember the Jesus and democracy with whenever there was an important decision, Jesus would say to the disciple, "Let's have a vote on it." It never happened. Okay, but the Southern Baptists pride themselves on being very democratic. So pastor said, "Let's take a vote on it. All in favor of Sam Oni's membership, please raise your hands." The hands went up. All opposed, the hands went up. And the pastor, having a commanding view of the congregation, could see that a slim majority favored my membership. But the diehards would not concede. So the vote was taken the second time with similar result, but still they won't concede. So the pastor asked for a standing vote. And finally, it became clear to the diehards that they had lost the debate. And that was how, as I say, tongue in cheek, whenever I get a chance to speak on the subject, I was warmly, lovingly, compassionately welcomed into fellowship. My very first Sunday in America, among the very same people who have been sending missionaries to my people since 1853, almost 110 years to the day.
That's an amazing story, Mr. Sam, and yet you persevered and stood there while they took that vote. Good for you, because many of us would not have done that. Let me ask our viewers, just for if anybody has. I'm sorry, I wish we could just bring our viewers on, Dana, and have them talk. But I know there are others that have had maybe not the same experience. That was many years ago, but some of this is still happening, right? Maybe not the same way. My mother, for example, and I wrote about that in this week's Afro edition on equity and education. In Maryland, you could not go to the University of Maryland. they had not admitted, Black students. My mother came along long before you, and my grandfather got them to concede, the governor to concede, if the major was not offered at the Black school at that time, it was Morgan University, State College, then the state of Maryland paid tuition, room, board, and everything to send their Black students out of town. So my mother and her sisters went to the University of Wisconsin on the state of Maryland's dime. And any other Black student who wanted to go to pursue studies in anything that was not offered at the Black college, they got a scholarship, room, board, tuition, and 2 trips a year, one there and one back. Dana, your dad broke a barrier in Buffalo, and Dana, you were a part of a groundbreaking class yourself. How was that for you?
Yes, well, first with my dad was interesting, a connection with the Murphy family. Was it your great uncle, Dr. Leland Jones?
My uncle.
Your uncle, Leland Jones, and my dad, Judge Trammell, were the only African-American students in the University of Buffalo Law School class of 1953. And that was interesting. Then he went on to, Leland went on to be a councilman, and my dad, a judge, the first elected judge in the city of Buffalo. And in my case, I was part of the largest African-American class admitted into Johns Hopkins University in the fall of 1988. And then the following fall, the conservative paper called for all of our SAT scores, which we happily turned over because we knew that we were qualified to be there. But what turned out was it was the legacies that really should not have been at Hopkins, not the Black students that they admitted that year. So we had a little victory in that sense, but it was definitely a challenging time, those 4 years at Hopkins in the late 80s.
So here we are. Right. Go ahead, Dana. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, welcome our guests, and want to thank you for listening in. This is the Chicken Box, Black People versus Integration. We're here with our guest, Sam Oni, who was the first to integrate Mercer University in Macon, Georgia. And this was almost 60 years ago. And we're enjoying this multi-generational conversation. I'm representing Gen X. Dr. Draper is our millennial boomer. And Sam Oni, I think you're the silent generation. I don't think you're too silent, but you are part of the silent generation with your recent birthday that we celebrated not too long ago. I want to thank you for having you on. We have a couple of questions that we want to pose to you and to our viewers today as we continue this discussion. Getting on the box, Black people versus school integration.
Right, and it's almost time to get off the box. And I see Chippy Bass said that her first cousin, the late Clarence Daly, broke a barrier at Baltimore Polytechnic School as one of the 10 Black students to integrate poly. And so that's a good fun fact. But here we are in 2021, and our young people are still struggling for equity. So you can go to the school, but they're not all equitable, right? So there's a difference between equality and equity. That's another whole chicken box. But we would invite you to pick up this week's copy of the Afro. The entire edition is about equity in education. That's the title of it. Every single page is about equity in education. There's some HBCU college and university profiles, but there are also, that graphic there, it talks about equity, because equity says that we recognize that we don't all start at the same place to get to where we need to be. And so as we wrap this up, here's what we typically do, Mr. Sam, and we're going to ask you to go. Why don't you go? Why don't you're our guest. You go first. This is a chicken box. So we call it 30 seconds to get on the box. If there's anything you want to say, your story has been fascinating. We thank you so much because I learned a lot, and it looks as if our viewers learned a lot as well. And so thank you, Chippy and Rico and Ricardo, for hanging in with us. We have Jewel and Byron, and who else do we have, Dana, that joined us today?
We also had Q Minley, my neighbor, tuning in. She's an HBCU grad, so I think we're we're going to have some comments about HBCUs and their relevancy today now that we have integrated schools.
Right.
Thank you for
HBCU.
listening in.
Right. So I'm an HBCU grad of Morgan State University right here in Baltimore, and Morgan has a 100% increase in enrollment this fall.
Wow.
1,900 freshmen, 900 last year this time, 1,900 freshmen, so many that the overflow for housing is a local hotel.
Oh,
Yes, yes. Johnny asks, is there a digital copy of the edition? Yes. If you go to afro.com, and Johnny, we would encourage you to subscribe so we can get you on that list and to receive that digital. So Dana, if Johnny does that right now, and for those who are asking, it's $40 for the entire year for the digital. If Johnny does that today, can he get this special edition digitally?
If he gets it, let's see, we have already put in the numbers for the print edition, but he can receive the digital edition this week. If you get it in today, Johnny, I can make sure you're on the list.
Okay, so note his name because we want to do that. We want to do that as well. All right, so in these last 4.5 minutes we have, Sam, you don't have to say anything. I mean, you can finish something about your story, but you've got 30 seconds, 30 to 45 seconds to just be on the box for a closing comment.
I'm reminded of my. I'm alluding to James Baldwin. He was our voice, our prophet, and as the good book says, a prophet has no honor but in his own country and his own people. But he was so perceptive. By the way, in a Baltimore uh, native son, Ta-Nehisi Coates seems to be emerging as another voice that speaks for us. Baldwin it was that said, not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed without being faced. The country at large refuses to face this self-inflicted wound of racism. And it is self-inflicted because America could have become the model for the entire world, because it's one country where I don't even know that there's a country on the face of the globe that doesn't have representation in America, where all of God's children will have come together and become a model uh, of of collaboration, of reconciliation, of love, and and achieve great things, becoming a model for other countries. So the matter of facing the music, the very, very terrible music of racism, remains a very compelling one. And until this nation is, so in using the metaphor of, I don't know if I said it earlier, of the wound, a wound that is unattended, uh, it's, you leave it alone and pretend it isn't there, and it festers. And I don't want to push the metaphor too far, because with the thing that comes out of festering wound, it's very, very unpleasant. And that's what we're witnessing. We all, well, the entire world, it was done in broad daylight. The whole world was watching when Chauvin planted his knee or knees on the neck of George Floyd. And it continues unabated, unabated. And that is precisely because the challenge, the nation refuses to face the challenge of racism and root it out until that challenge, that challenge is faced and faced squarely with determination, with commitment. Then we will continue to live and America's true greatness will continue to elude it. And
Yep, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, from the great Sam Oni. Dana, I'm going to yield my time to you. You're on the box.
Thank you again, everyone, for tuning in. And thank you so much, Sam. Like I mentioned, I so enjoy hearing you speak. And we're going to have to invite you again to hear some more stories. And what we can't forget the struggles that our ancestors have fought on our behalf to giving me the opportunity. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be able to study away from my home and also have the opportunity to have the Johns Hopkins experience and the HBCU experience. I took classes at Morgan State University while I was at Baltimore as well. And now as my children are looking at schools, they're weighing their different options. And it's really interesting now that there is a more focus on HBCUs now. And I love that they're getting the attention that they need and the funding, because you really need the resources. And I love the leadership that they're showing with respect to COVID-19 and really protecting our students and our legacies at these various institutions. And one thing that we like to do when we get on the Chicken Box is also share an Afro fact from the archive. So I'm just going to share that briefly before we close. That integration. This week's Afro fact is from the August 19th, 1972 edition, and the headline read, 17 Blacks likely to become members of the 93rd Congress. And with the nomination of multiple Blacks in states such as Georgia and Tennessee, the Congress was expected to have the highest number of non-white members in history. And at the time, there were only 13 non-white members, and all were expected to be reelected. And that is this week's Afro fact.
And there you have it. That's some, and we have a record number in there as well now, and as many, many more than 13 in the 117th Congress. I think there are, I'm looking it up right now, 57.
Wow.
57 members of the Congressional Black Caucus. And when you have that many people in the caucus, we'll be able to move the needle. Again, thank you, Sam Oni, so much for sharing your story. Thank you, Dana Peck, for being a guest co-host. You can co-host anytime. Thank you to our viewers for being with us today. God bless you. We will see you next Thursday this time, but we invite you, go to afro.com, get the information for the free event next Thursday at 10 before the Chicken Box. I'm moderating a panel with 4 outstanding educators talking about equity in education. All right, take care. See you next week.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to fellowship with you.